The wind cut through the night like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. The snow had already stopped, but the real danger had arrived. Ice. Thick, glassy, almost invisible beneath the dim streetlights. I stood near the curve of the road, shouting into the freezing air as another car lost control, tires spinning helplessly, sliding sideways across the frozen surface. My breath came out in heavy clouds, my heart pounding harder with every screech of rubber against ice. I had warned them days ago. I asked for salt, for barriers, for anything that could prevent this. But the HOA ignored every message like it didn't matter. Then headlights appeared at the top of the hill. An emergency vehicle, sirens cutting through the cold silence rushing toward us. For a moment, relief, then fear. The vehicle reached the curve, hit the ice, and began to slide. Neighbors shouted. Someone screamed. Phones lifted into the air, recording. It's going to crash. The vehicle struggled, tires fighting for grip, finally slowing just short of disaster. More sirens followed. Flashing lights painted the frozen road red and blue as officials stepped out carefully, their boots scraping against solid ice. Their faces changed the moment they saw the road. And in that instant, the air felt different. I didn't know this frozen road would uncover something far worse than negligence. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Not long before that frozen night, life in Silver Pine Ridge had felt calm, almost perfect. When I first moved into the neighborhood, I believed I had finally found the quiet place I had been searching for. Tall pine trees lined the streets, homes were neat and orderly, and the silence at night felt peaceful rather than empty. After years of noise and constant stress, this community felt like a fresh start. Mornings were slow, evenings were quiet, and for a while, everything seemed exactly as promised. The Homeowners Association appeared organized and efficient. The entrance sign was always clean, the landscaping well-maintained, and monthly newsletters arrived with reminders about seasonal care and community standards. It gave the impression that everything here was carefully managed, safe, predictable, controlled. That was when I first met Derek Halvorson. He introduced himself during my second week, standing at my door with a polite smile and a folder tucked neatly under his arm. He spoke calmly, welcoming me to the neighborhood, explaining the importance of maintaining community order, and assuring me that the HOA took safety seriously. At the time, he seemed strict but reasonable, someone who valued structure and discipline. Winter arrived quietly. At first, it was nothing more than a thin layer of frost on the road during early mornings. Easy to overlook if you weren't paying attention. But I noticed. The shaded curve near the lower hill froze first, hidden from sunlight by tall pines. One morning, I watched a car slightly lose traction at that turn. Not a full slide, but enough to make my stomach tighten. That was when I sent my first message to the HOA. Nothing dramatic, just a simple request, perhaps early salt treatment, maybe a temporary caution sign. Preventative action, basic safety. Hours later, the reply came, short, cold, dismissive. Conditions have been reviewed. Additional treatment is not necessary at this time. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling that followed. But the frost didn't disappear. Each morning it grew thicker, harder, more dangerous. Every time I passed that curve, I could feel the tires slip slightly beneath me. One afternoon, while collecting mail, I mentioned it to a neighbor. He gave a quiet, knowing look, the kind that comes from experience. The HOA usually waits until something happens, he said. Something happens. The words stayed with me longer than they should have. A few days later, I sent another email, this time with photos. Clear images of ice forming across the curve, darker patches spreading along the asphalt, visible danger building. I explained again, calmly, that early action could prevent accidents, could prevent injuries. The response arrived the next morning, formal, final, unmoved. Conditions have been reviewed. Additional treatment is not necessary at this time. I stared at the message for a long moment. Something about it didn't feel like oversight, it felt deliberate. Outside, the temperature continued to fall. And for the first time since moving into Silver Pine Ridge, the neighborhood didn't feel completely safe. Something was wrong. The ice did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, tightening its grip day by day until the curve near the hill no longer looked like pavement at all. It looked smooth, dark, and dangerously polished, a trap waiting for one mistake. I kept watching. And I kept warning them. Photos, reports, timestamp messages. I marked the exact areas where tires had begun slipping, explained how the shade kept the road colder than the rest of the neighborhood, and asked again for salt, sand, or even a simple warning sign. Nothing extreme, just prevention. Every message was acknowledged. None were acted on. Then something happened that changed everything. One early morning, a neighbor quietly spread a small bag of salt across the frozen curve. Not to break rules, just to keep someone from crashing. That afternoon, a notice appeared on his door. A $500 unauthorized pavement alteration fine. $500 for trying to make the road safer. When he showed it to me, something inside me shifted. This was no longer about slow maintenance or oversight. This was control, rules enforced without reason. I wrote again, this time firmer. I attached the photo of the fine and asked how safety action could be punished while danger was ignored. Hours later, a reply arrived directly from Derek. Short, cold, final. Please stop interfering with HOA operations. The words stayed with me longer than they should have. Days passed and the ice thickened. Tires began losing grip more often. Small slides at first, quick corrections, close calls, drivers tightening their grip on the wheel. Enough to spread quiet fear across the neighborhood. Enough to know something worse was coming. Then came the first real incident. A sedan moving down the hill lost traction at the curve. The rear wheel slid sideways, the car drifting toward the curb as the driver struggled to regain control. For a moment, it looked like the car would spin completely. It stopped just short. No crash, no injuries. But the sound of tires scraping helplessly against ice stayed in the air long after the car stopped moving. People began noticing now. Conversations started in low voices. Some avoided the curve entirely. Everyone could see the danger. Everyone except the people responsible for fixing it. I sent another report. Urgent this time. Photos of tire marks, temperature readings, timestamps. Clear warning, if nothing changed, a serious accident was inevitable. The response came quickly. But it wasn't about safety. It was another warning. The HOA stated that repeated, exaggerated safety complaints were creating unnecessary concern in the community. Continued false reporting, they said, could result in penalties. False reporting. I stared at the message, and in that moment, the situation became clear. This was no longer about weather or delays or oversight. They were choosing not to act. Outside, the temperature kept falling. The ice hardened, silent and dangerous, stretching across the curve like a hidden threat. And now, the conflict had begun. The temperature did not ease. It dropped faster, sharper, turning the air brittle and heavy. By late afternoon, the cold had settled deep into the ground, and the road began to change again. The curve near the hill no longer looked dark and wet. It looked smooth, reflective, almost polished. Ice was forming, thin at first, then spreading wider with every passing hour. I checked the forecast. A freeze storm was coming overnight. Temperatures would plunge far below freezing, and whatever moisture remained on the road would harden into solid ice. I didn't wait. I sent another warning to the HOA. Urgent, direct, clear. I explained the incoming storm, the worsening road condition, and the growing risk. I asked for immediate salt treatment, temporary barriers, anything to prevent cars from losing control. No reply came. As evening settled, the cold deepened. Streetlights flickered on, casting pale reflections across the road. The surface shimmered faintly when headlights passed over it. Not wet, not soft, solid, dangerous. Then it happened. A neighbor's SUV approached the curve slowly, carefully. The tires touched the frozen section and instantly lost grip. The vehicle slid sideways, drifting toward the curb as the driver fought the wheel. For a long second, it looked like the SUV would spin completely. It stopped just short. No crash, but close enough to silence the entire street. Lights turned on in nearby houses. Neighbors stepped outside, watching the road, whispering in uneasy voices. Fear spreads quietly, but once it starts, it grows fast. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I went straight to Derek's house. His porch light was already on when he opened the door, calm as always, warm air spilling out behind him into the freezing night. I told him everything, the forecast, the ice, the near accident, the risk of something worse before morning. My voice carried urgency now, not calm concern. He listened, then shook his head. He said conditions were being monitored. He said reacting too early could create unnecessary cost and liability. Calm words. Controlled tone. No urgency at all. I stared at him in disbelief. "The road is freezing right now," I said. "You know it's dangerous." His expression didn't change. Then he said quietly, almost coldly, "If you continue spreading panic among residents, we may have to issue a formal violation notice." Spreading panic. The words hung in the freezing air long after he closed the door. I walked back through the cold silence, the wind cutting through my coat, the temperature still falling. Behind me, the neighborhood lights flickered across the road, now shining against a fully frozen surface. By midnight, the curve had turned into solid glass, and the storm had only just begun. The night the disaster began did not feel sudden. It felt inevitable. By the time darkness settled fully, the curve had already turned into hardened glass. Streetlights reflected sharply across the frozen surface, and every passing beam of light made the ice shimmer. Smooth, silent, dangerous. The cold had locked everything in place. Waiting. Then came the sirens. At first distant, then closer. Louder. An emergency vehicle appeared at the top of the hill, lights flashing red and blue across the frozen road. For a brief moment, hope passed through me. Someone would finally see the danger. Someone would finally act. The vehicle reached the curve. Its tires touched the ice and instantly lost grip. The heavy vehicle began to slide, drifting sideways across the frozen surface. The driver fought carefully, steering with precision, trying to avoid spinning out completely. Neighbors shouted. Someone screamed. Phones lifted into the air, recording. For one terrifying second, it looked like the vehicle would crash. It stopped just short. More sirens followed, flashing lights painting the road in sharp colors. Officials stepped out carefully, their boots slipping slightly against the ice as they tested the surface. One look was enough. This road was dangerous. A city engineer approached me, his expression focused, serious. "Did you notice the ice forming earlier?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "Did you report it?" I nodded again. Inside my home, I showed him everything. Emails, timestamps, photos, warnings sent days before the storm, messages explaining the danger clearly, responses dismissing it, proof of every ignored warning. He read quietly, then asked one more question. "Did the HOA ever mention the city winter safety advisory?" I shook my head. That was when everything changed. Weeks earlier, the city had issued official winter safety notices to all private communities, instructions about early ice treatment, high-risk zones, and required preventative action. Silver Pine Ridge had received them. Documented. Confirmed. But no action had been taken. As officials continued reviewing the records, something else began to surface. Financial reports. Maintenance funds allocated for winter road safety had not been fully used for treatment. Portions had been redirected away from maintenance priorities, quietly, internally. And in that moment, I realized something deeper. This wasn't just a weather problem. There was a pattern, a paper trail, and it was pointing somewhere unexpected. Outside, officials began documenting everything more carefully now. Photos, measurements, records. What had started as a response to dangerous ice was turning into something much bigger. They requested full HOA maintenance logs, financial statements, and compliance records. The investigation had begun. Morning arrived cold and gray, but the silence from the night before was gone. The flashing lights had disappeared, yet the feeling they left behind remained heavy, watchful, unresolved. What had started as a frozen road was now something far more serious. The investigation moved quickly. City officials returned with purpose, documenting every section of the road, measuring untreated areas, photographing the curve from multiple angles. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was overlooked. They weren't just responding to danger anymore. They were building a case. Then they requested the HOA records. At first, Derek appeared calm, composed. He spoke carefully to small groups of residents, repeating that the situation was under review and that the weather had been unusually severe. He assured everyone the HOA had followed proper procedures. But when officials asked for maintenance logs, treatment schedules, and purchase records for winter supplies, something in his expression tightened. The documents came slowly, and they didn't match the reality we had seen. Maintenance entries marked as completed on days when the road had clearly remained untreated. Scheduled treatment listed without proof of materials used. Missing records where documentation should have existed. The more officials reviewed, the quieter Derek became. Then residents began speaking. One neighbor said he had reported icy patches weeks earlier, no response. Another described repeated emails about poor drainage near the curve. Ignored. Someone else admitted they stopped reporting issues entirely because nothing ever changed. Patterns were forming, and patterns tell stories. I was asked to provide my records. Every email, every photo, every warning. Together they created a clear timeline: danger reported, risk increasing, no action taken. When officials compared my timeline with the HOA maintenance logs, inconsistencies became undeniable. Then came the discovery that shifted everything further. Financial reports. Buried inside routine expense summaries were allocations marked for winter road treatment, salt, sand, seasonal safety preparation. But not all of that money had been used for maintenance. Portions had been redirected elsewhere within the HOA budget. Not missing, not stolen, but moved away from safety preparation. When Derek was asked about it, his calm began to crack. He said the funds had been temporarily reallocated, that conditions had not required full treatment, that decisions had been made based on assessment. His words were measured, but the certainty behind them was fading. Around him, the mood in the community was changing. Residents who had once trusted quiet reassurances were now asking direct questions. Why were warnings ignored? Why were residents fined for spreading salt? Why had city safety notices not been followed? Conversations grew louder, sharper, harder to control. The narrative Derek had carefully maintained was slipping. Officials continued reviewing documents, building a clearer picture piece by piece. Maintenance failures, ignored warnings, misplaced priorities. What had once been scattered concerns was now structured evidence. By evening, the weight of it all hung across Silver Pine Ridge like the storm had the night before. Then the announcement came. An emergency HOA meeting would be held the following night. Mandatory attendance. Officials would present their findings. Records would be reviewed publicly. Leadership decisions would be addressed. The tension across the community rose instantly. The truth beneath the frozen road was about to surface. The meeting room had never felt this heavy. Every chair was filled, every wall lined with residents standing shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with tension and quiet anger. Conversations were low, sharp, uneasy, the kind that carry more weight than shouting. Faces that once nodded politely during routine HOA meetings now looked hard, watchful, waiting for answers. At the front of the room, Derek stood behind the long board table. He looked composed, dressed neatly as always, posture straight, voice calm. But something beneath that calm felt strained, stretched too tight. He began speaking before the room fully settled. He called the ice incident an unfortunate result of unexpected weather. He said conditions had changed faster than predicted, that procedures had been followed, that decisions were made in the best interests of the community. His tone was measured, controlled, almost rehearsed. But this time, no one relaxed. Murmurs spread quietly. Neighbors exchanged glances, arms folded, eyes narrowed. The explanation sounded polished, but hollow. Then the doors at the back opened. City officials entered carrying folders and documents, their presence instantly silencing the room. The atmosphere shifted. This was no longer just an HOA meeting. It was something formal, serious, unavoidable. Derek paused, watching them approach. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. The lead official placed the folder on the table and spoke calmly. The investigation into the road incident had been completed. Findings would be shared publicly. Transparency was required. The room felt frozen. I sat near the center, my timeline of emails and warnings open in my hands. Every message, every ignored report, every photo showing the ice-forming days before the disaster. My pulse felt steady but heavy. This was the moment truth would surface. Derek tried to regain control. He repeated that the weather had been severe, that isolated incidents could not always be prevented. His voice remained calm, but the authority behind it had begun to weaken. Then the official opened the folder. Pages turned slowly. Dates were read aloud. City winter safety advisories issued weeks earlier. Maintenance requirements clearly outlined. Preventative treatment expectations ignored. Reports submitted by residents. Financial records reviewed. Murmurs grew louder. Residents shifted in their seats, whispering, realizing. The official continued, steady, precise, undeniable. Untreated roads despite warnings. Funds redirected away from maintenance. Violation notices issued against residents attempting safety action. The tension in the room tightened like a wire. Derek's posture changed. his shoulders stiffened, his expression tightening, the calm slipping away piece by piece. He tried to speak, but the official raised a hand gently, not forceful, but final. Then Derek's control broke. "You want perfect roads but complain about every fee," he snapped, frustration finally breaking through. "And maybe if people here actually knew how to drive in winter, we wouldn't even be having this conversation." The room went silent. In that moment, the calm image he had held for so long cracked. Then came the sentence that stopped everything. The investigation had identified multiple serious violations of community safety obligations. Derek stood frozen, stunned, as the truth finally surfaced. For a moment after that sentence, no one moved. Then the room erupted. Voices rose from every direction, disbelief, anger, shock, all colliding at once as the weight of the investigation settled over the community. What had been dismissed for weeks as exaggeration was now confirmed in clear, undeniable terms. The frozen road had not been an accident. It had been a failure. The lead official spoke again, steady and firm, his voice cutting through the noise. The investigation had confirmed that multiple city-issued winter safety directives were not followed. Required preventative treatment for known high-risk zones, including the curve, had not been performed. Maintenance logs listed treatments that never happened, and funds designated for winter road safety had been redirected away from maintenance priorities. Not lost, not stolen, but knowingly moved. And because of those decisions, a preventable hazard had nearly turned into tragedy. Derek tried to respond, his voice strained, no longer confident. He spoke of judgment calls, of resource allocation, of weather unpredictability. But every word sounded weaker than the last. The documents laid across the table told a clearer story than he could. A resident near the front stood and demanded answers. Why were warnings ignored? Another followed. Why were residents fined for spreading salt? More voices rose, sharper now, pressing forward. The calm authority Derek once carried had dissolved, replaced by tension and isolation. Then came the announcement. The findings would be formally submitted for legal review. Safety compliance failures, negligence, and mismanagement of designated maintenance funds were now under official scrutiny. Further action would proceed according to regulatory process. Derek fell silent. Outside, through the meeting room windows, bright work lights had already appeared. City crews had begun emergency treatment of the road, spreading salt, securing the curve, restoring safe conditions immediately. Action, finally, but too late to prevent what had already been revealed. Then the final decision was delivered. Until the investigation concluded, authority over maintenance and operational control would be removed from the current HOA leadership. The meaning was clear. The leadership that ignored warnings, dismissed danger, and allowed risk to grow unchecked was no longer in control. The room remained tense, but something had shifted. Not celebration, release. The truth had surfaced, responsibility acknowledged, the weight of uncertainty finally breaking. Yet the emotional aftermath lingered. Because while the road would be repaired and leadership would change, trust would take far longer to rebuild. And everyone in that room knew Silver Pine Ridge would never feel the same again. Morning came quietly, but for the first time in weeks, the road looked safe. The dangerous shine of ice was gone, replaced by a rough, treated surface covered with salt and sand. Temporary warning signs stood along the curve, and fresh treatment lines marked where crews had worked through the night. Cars passed smoothly now, tires gripping firmly, no sliding, no panic, just normal movement. The fear that once hung over Silver Pine Ridge was finally beginning to lift. The investigation moved forward quickly. Derek was formally removed from leadership as legal proceedings continued. The findings were no longer rumors or speculation, they were official record. Failure to act on safety directives, negligence in responding to documented hazards, and mismanagement of maintenance funds were now part of a formal case. The man who once controlled every decision in the community no longer spoke for it. And the neighborhood began to change. An interim oversight group was formed first, followed by a full leadership transition. This time, transparency replaced silence. Maintenance schedules were shared openly. Safety concerns were addressed quickly instead of dismissed. Residents who once stayed quiet began speaking up early, making sure no warning would ever be ignored again. The community felt different, stronger, more aware, more connected. The road remained safe. Sometimes I still walk past that curve in the early morning when the air is cold and the light is soft. The memory of that frozen night has not disappeared, but it no longer feels heavy. It feels like a reminder. That silence allows danger to grow, but persistence can change the outcome. I never wanted conflict. I only wanted the road to be safe, but sometimes speaking up is the only way to prevent something worse. Peace has returned to Silver Pine Ridge. The lesson remains simple. Ignoring warnings does not remove danger. It only delays the moment it reveals itself. Have you ever had an HOA fine you for something that was actually helping the neighborhood? Tell me your Karen stories in the comments. I read every single one.